Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So every couple of weeks, we come in here, we talk about questions, sometimes we have answers. And today, I actually have a couple of questions that came in from users offline, so we'll talk about those. Also, got a few other topics of interest, but if you have questions, put them in chat, we'll see them, and if I don't purposefully ignore them, I may accidentally ignore them, but in all reality, we'll get to it. We'll talk about it, because this is a show for talking. Almost like a talk show, except you don't get paid nearly enough. So, who are we? Well, to my... you're going to be to my right today, Mala. We have Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Good evening, everyone. Doing well.
And to my non-Euclidean right, we have Mike Christensen.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
All right. Non-Euclidean, Euclidean, everything. But let's talk a little about SQL Bits. SQL Bits just finished up, just wrapped up this past week. And Mala, you were a presenter. Now, you were a remote presenter, as I recall.
Yes.
How was that experience?
It was interesting. It was my first experience at this particular conference. So there were a lot of things that I did not know. The team running it, they did a good job with many things. The only thing they missed was giving us a tech rehearsal, which I think is really important if you're a tech presenter. They probably were too busy to do it with well over 200 speakers, and they were just a team of 4 people handling the show, which is a heck of a lot of work. So I completely forgive them that, but it looks like the in-person event went really well. The online experience, to me, it was okay. I mean, the tech content was awesome. All the speakers did a great job. There was a good spread of topics on different areas. They balanced that out really well. So you could sit in one room and still get through, a decent amount of content, which is the kind of stuff I like to do when I'm working, especially. Do not click on, switching things. I just go to one room and I stay there and get what I can out of it. And that way it worked well. It could have been better with regards to the tech and things like that, but, a blended event is not an easy thing to pull off with a limited budget. So that's kind of okay to my mind. Otherwise, I thought the team did a great job, and I will definitely consider submitting again next time. And if you're thinking of a tech conference to attend, I definitely recommend it, because the content is pretty good, and it's not all over the place. Like sometimes the last few years of the summit, we saw that like nobody knew what the conference was about. It's like so spread out in multiple directions. So they did a good job. The focus essentially was on SQL Server. There was some amount of, oh gosh, he went away. There was some amount of Power BI, and there was some amount of other stuff, but the core focus was essentially on SQL Server. And I personally, as a SQL Server professional, I really appreciated that. And I got a good amount of knowledge out of it.
Good. So that was a pretty good, sounds like a pretty good end result. And hybrid conferences are probably twice as difficult as choosing in-person or remote, because you have to do both of them at once. And I mean, that sounds like a silly, flippant statement, but there is a lot of work that is put into an in-person conference. And just getting all of the logistics around that. You have to make sure that the venue is fit, that you have enough spaces for all of the speakers, you have enough platforms for everybody, you have the seating capacity, you have the ability for people to get from room to room, and all of the logistics involved in that, the projectors, the microphones. All of that is a lot of work. And having done in-person conferences, having run in-person conferences, huge amount of work right there. Running an online conference, also a lot of work, because you still have technical difficulties. You still have interacting with the software. especially if you're using some third-party solution as opposed to a whole bunch of Teams calls or a whole bunch of Zoom calls or something like that. As soon as you introduce more parties, you have more chances of something weird happening, something not quite working right. And so when you've got one volunteer staff, because the SQL Bits people, they're not paid, they're community volunteers.
Right.
And you have that staff, they're now being pulled in two directions, and I can appreciate the challenges there. And it kind of makes me think that in 2022, we're probably going to have a fair number of hybrid conferences, but that it may be just a smart idea. If you're going to have an in-person conference, have it be strictly in person. Unless you know that you have the logistics to be able to support online as well.
Absolutely. I fully agree with that. Another thing also, one thing I expected and I didn't get is whatever online networking that has been the norm over the past year, like the past two past summits, the online networking it wasn't like you meet somebody in person, but it was still there and you could actually hang out in a chat room and talk to people. That is not there in a blended conference. Naturally, when people are there in person, that's what they want to do, is to hang out in person, not log in somewhere and talk to somebody they can't see. So don't expect any kind of networking or anything. Your only takeaway is going to be the tech knowledge. And as long as somebody is okay with that, it's a good choice. But there is zero networking in a blended conference, like totally zero.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you lose one of the major benefits of being at a conference. The other thing that I would make note of with respect to it's twice as hard to do a hybrid conference is that you also need sufficient bandwidth. You need cameras, laptops, capture cards, if you want to do it right. Now, if you just have Zoom and it's projected on a screen and somebody set up Bluetooth speakers, then you kind of have one component of it, but now the people can't see the in-person section. So if you want to have remote viewers seeing in-person talks, well, now you're talking about cameras, which need people to operate the cameras. You have to have people who can do AV work. You need to have all of the AV setup. You need to have a lot of internet bandwidth to be able to stream out multiple encoding streams while pulling in all of the people who are presenting remotely and being able to play what they've got in the different rooms where those people aren't. So yeah, it's an enormous challenge to be able to do something simultaneously remote and in person, to the point where it's probably twice as difficult, if not slightly more. You get almost no economies of scope combining a hybrid in-person and virtual experience.
Yeah, that's very true. Also, something really important, even if you're doing small, not even conferences, if you're doing small one-day events like the kind I'm doing for the Women in Tech group next month. We are having a mental health and wellness day with about 8 different talks and such. It's really important to have a sort of a rehearsal with your speakers ahead of time if they want to. Like, somebody may not be comfortable with Zoom as much they are with Teams and things like that. So get on a 5-minute call, make sure that everybody knows where they're going to appear on the screen, how much real estate they're going to have to manipulate whatever they have to show to you. All that is important to rehearse. Otherwise, when I got on with bits, it was a mess because we had never rehearsed it before. There were like 3 different people, the moderator, my co-presenter, me, 3 little windows on the screen. And then, I had my PowerPoint slide, and then I had to switch to my scripts, which I couldn't see, a little bit behind, all sorts of stuff. Only because we never rehearsed it before, and I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, that can be a challenge.
Yeah.
So
I watched a behind-the-scenes video of the C# Fritz guy, Jeff Fritz, and he was running dev intersection with a Nook, and I was fascinated by it, but it's super hard work. I mean, like, and you got to do, as you said, with the inputs and the outputs of the separate audio channels and different
Yep.
screens, and
Yep.
you got to know the tech you need, and you got to know, and not everybody who does SQL or programming knows how to do all that AV stuff.
Sure.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean,
yeah.
when running TriPass meetings, you know, I had a fair amount of equipment where I have my laptop, my capture card, microphone, lapel mic for the speaker. I have a webcam where I can capture, and a tripod, of course, where I can get video of the person, capture card to get video of the stream, be able to use OBS Studio to link it all together and broadcast it. That took a while to put together. And that's one room with one person. Multiply that by 16, and you know, that's a huge amount of work. I've seen SQL Saturdays where Austin, I think, was one of them, where they had somebody whose hobby was audiovisual, and they had the appropriate equipment that they just lent to the SQL Saturday, and the guy who did it all was running between rooms, and like, yeah, can we record? And he had a really cool setup where if recording was okay, then he pushes a button, it kind of dual streams. But even then, that wasn't also broadcasting. That was just saving and storing it on disk so that he could then encode it and put it up on their website later. And that was a few years ago. That was probably the only time that I've seen in a SQL Saturday good use of AV technologies for later broadcasting.
Right.
And you know, that required a person who just was really into the hobby, and actually it might have even been a second job for all I remember.
Does birthday parties.
Birthday parties, bar mitzvahs, who knows?
Backyard, you know, COVID, you know, watch the movie in your backyard kind of thing. Also, you need the right throw distance, you know.
This was probably good 4, maybe 5 years ago. It's been a minute.
Oh, SARS then, sorry.
Avian bird flu. So, next topic. We have in chat Rednello, who reached out a couple weeks ago during Shop Talk, and we poked some gentle fun at Rackspace. Not at Rednello, at Rackspace. And so wanted to follow up. Mad Cow. Oh boy. Kreutzfeld Yakov is no laughing matter.
Prions.
There's a horrible macabre joke in there that I'm not going to tell, because we're talking instead about disaster recovery. Some combination of high availability and disaster recovery. Kind of depends on how you classify this scenario. Technically, it was probably more of a high availability issue, but we could easily stretch it to disaster recovery. So the gist of it, for folks who don't remember or didn't see the episode a couple weeks ago, this was an issue in which a Windows patch went south and led to difficulties connecting the IIS-based .NET application to a SQL Server hosted on the same machine. There was some issue, led to failures, and the questions were, first, how do I diagnose this? What could be the cause? Afterwards, after some analysis, it looks like it was a weird patch that then required a .NET Framework upgrade. So led to kind of the follow-up question for today, which is, well, if a company is not really able to afford separate dedicated servers where, you know, you can do a lot of you can have a real disaster recovery environment, what kinds of options are available? And So figured that we would take a little bit of time and talk about it. The follow-up email, which came in today, went into the topic just a bit further, and let me bring it up here for recollection. And so, cost-effective plan that fits within their RPO and RTO requirements was saying, okay, well, what if there's a backup server that hosts SQL Server and the website, and you have this secondary instance, and using something like log shipping to back up, basically to consistently move changes over to that secondary. And then in the event of failover, use log shipping, like break log shipping, take over the secondary, and change connection strings to point to the secondary. And the question was, is that a reasonable solution? I mean, short answer is yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, we have to talk about the longer answer. Why? Because I've got 45 minutes of content.
There's that locked door. I can go.
So, first, a little bit of talk RPO and RTO. You want to give that your go, Mike? RPO Speedwagon. It was a band.
Wait. REO.
I know. Yeah, I know. All right. Recovery point objective, recovery time objective. So recovery time objective, think of that as, oh my gosh, how long are you saying we're down again? And, oh, well, in the event of a failure, we'll be down no more than 4 hours. So we'll get you back up and rolling within 4 hours. Recovery point objective. Wait a minute, how much data am I losing? So again, that might be like 8 hours. In the event of a disaster, I might say we can lose 8 hours of data, but you have to get us new servers back up and running within 4 hours. So that's RTO, RPO. That combination is entirely business driven. And so this is a conversation that the business has to drive. It can't be engineering driven. It can't be IT driven, because IT doesn't have the answers. They have the capabilities to get to a solution with certain caveats, but they can't decide on their own. The business has to decide. Now, what's the business going to decide? We can't have any downtime. We have no loss of data, no downtime ever. And then this is where IT says, I got you covered. What we can do is set up this very expensive solution that probably is using bidirectional replication, multi-master writing, that is going to take probably millions of dollars to implement. And then the business people's eyes bulge and they say, how much money, how many zeros did you say? And you say, several $1 million. I mean, it's going to depend on how many servers you have. The more servers you have, the more millions of dollars you have to spend. And if you're in a situation where literally zero downtime, zero loss, zero RTO, zero RPO, or microseconds, milliseconds is the requirement, then yeah, you're probably spending millions and millions of dollars to ensure that this is going to be the case. And if that is so necessary to the existence of the company, probably going to spend enough money to make that true.
Airlines, maybe.
Even airlines, I'm not sure that there is a business scenario, because we're not talking real-time operating systems. So we're not talking about the type of software that would be in an airplane. That if you say, it's just going to go down for, 2 minutes, don't worry. A lot of people start worrying. It's weird.
I freak out.
But even at an airline, if their ticketing system goes down for 30 seconds, people just complain, it must be slow today. So they don't have zero. I mean, you could have hours, and every once in a while, every year or so, you'll see an outage of a good day for one of the airlines. I remember one year it was American, one year it was Delta. United's had its outages, and they'll go for a good day or so where nobody can buy tickets, nobody can get tickets processed, and everybody's back to working by hand on paper for a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why their RTO isn't seconds, because get the dot matrix printers, we're just going to be printing tickets out. They have that alternative. And so the story becomes, what is the reasonable value of RPO and RTO for the company? And this is, I'm going to drop a link in chat here. This is a little bit old.
I worked for a hospital, Kevin. This was many years ago, where we supported a system that would check patients in when they went to the emergency room or when they went to urgent care. So they could not afford, much downtime on it, mostly because the patient's history would be on the computer. Like, so the doctor has to see somebody comes in critically ill, what are the things that person is allergic to, or what is the current medication they're taking. If there is somebody with them or some way you can get that information, then that's okay. But most of the time it's from the online database that had to be there. So for a very long time, when the hospitals were a small unit, we would meticulously print out everything. Like they would have binders of, if the doctor wrote the patient a prescription, there would be one copy online, one would go in the file. So anytime the system goes down, grab the file. It may be backdated by some because the 1 hour printing thing kicked in the evening, but one day was okay. It was very rare that somebody had a medication change just yesterday and came in again today. Those things happen, but it's a little rare, and you had a reasonable amount of history to go with. So that was our backup, like literally a hard copy of the prescription.
Oh yeah,
Not anymore.
Yeah.
We're hosed without it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Shoot, one of my first jobs was in the medical filing rooms at a hospital, just taking all of those folders and, we've got, here's a label, here's the person. You need to put the stickers on, the colored stickers that have the first 3 letters of the last name and the 6 digits of their patient ID, and filing them in the records room and doing a whole bunch of fun stuff like that.
You couldn't do shift control N?
Well, this was all when I started. I was in high school at the time, so it was all paper. They did have a lot of it on electronic records, but it wasn't really formalized. It was more of, I don't even remember what the systems were, but they had some internal system they used, and they also had the paper records.
Yeah, the early ones, McKesson and eBrowser, and then a lot of homegrown systems. That just were built with their own staff, and mostly hospital.
Right.
Usually clinics didn't have that kind of stuff.
All mumps all the time. Anybody ever execute or design a sub 15-minute SQL Server RTO? Excellent question. It's an excellent question because I actually have this link pasted in chat. This is a few years old, but it is still actually really good. This comes from Brent Ozar and is a little worksheet for high availability and disaster recovery. So the idea is that the first page of the worksheet is essentially trying to understand what your RPO and RTO requirements look like for different scenarios. And it's everything from a patch failed, like what happened with Red Nello. Building is hit by a meteor, you have your SAN gets destroyed, or if you're running local disks, those disks somehow end up getting damaged, or you have database corruption. You have people accidentally deleting from a table when they forgot to put a where clause, or they mistakenly update. Those sorts of things, that is also a disaster from which we have to recover. And the second side of that is the chart that I want to talk about. And that chart is your Rpo and Rto requirements. And so sub 15 minutes for RTO, yeah, that's actually pretty common. It may cost you a bit, but you can use certain technologies. So if you check out the sheet, I've never dropped a table by mistake. All those tables deserved it. But, other people have. So, this is the negotiation phase, essentially, where IT goes to business. And remember, these are $2016. Numbers may have changed since then. Some things may have gotten a little cheaper. Some things a bit more expensive, especially when you have 7.9% core inflation. That will affect dollar numbers. But basically, if you need right now, can't go down, that was where I mentioned active servers bidirectional replication, and you're essentially doing multiple writes and ensuring that multiple machines get those writes in place before you're successfully committed, before that transaction says, yep, I'm good. That's going to slow you down as well.
Is that almost like I have like two computers, and like no matter what I'm doing, if I'm working on an Excel document, there's a whole other computer that's kind of keeping up with what I'm doing over here?
Think of it instead as you're typing with one hand on one computer and one hand on the other computer, and you're making the same keystrokes.
Wow.
You're
that's
like some
crazy.
internet wizard. That's the like moral
Tron.
equivalent.
Yeah, it's like Tron.
Yeah. Now, in reality, it's obviously not that, but you would have your applications writing to multiple SQL Server instances. You would have those multiple SQL Server instances that would be replicating. You would have processes that would ensure that the instances are all in sync. You basically have implemented a multi-write scenario that's distributed database technology, and you have to essentially build your own control system to ensure that you don't have a partition. That's a problem. This is incredibly expensive. This is a lot of big brain effort, and it's where you start telling the business, do you have this much money to put into the project? Because if you have that many zeros that you can drop on this project, if it is that important to you, because, we're talking about an order of magnitude more expensive than the next option. If you are just cool with dropping another zero there, we can do that. It's a lot of work. You may have to bring in experts. You may have to do a huge amount of testing, buy more hardware, and accept that your regular operations are probably going to be a lot slower because you need to quiesce the data to make sure that it is officially good on all instances. But if that's what you need, then that's what you need. Almost nobody needs that. That's where you get to the next phases down. And before we get to those next phases, so Rednello asks, you mentioned corruption. So if you're doing log shipping and the primary database gets corrupted, will log shipping copy the corruption along with the data to the backup? And Mala says, yes, it can. And Mala is absolutely right. There are situations in which if the corruption is specifically a problem with reading a drive that's failing, then that may not be copied over to your other machine. But if the corruption is due to a bug that leads to bad data being written to a page, then yeah, that'll just be pushed down to your secondary. If the corruption, so depending on the nature of the corruption, it might. Log shipping is not a protection against corruption. It's, you still run CheckDB.
Same thing with backups. Backups
Yes.
are not a protection against corruption either. You have to test your database for integrity. However often you think you can do it to ensure that that is not propagating to whatever. It can.
Yeah.
It doesn't all the time, like what Kevin said, but it can.
Right.
Yeah.
Describe a data recovery scenario in which you were a key player. Oh, where do I start? There was that time when I learned about truncate. There was that other time when I learned about delete. Third time when I learned about update. Fourth time when I learned about merge. Actually, there were 3 times where I learned about merge. But could we do an overview of log shipping? Asks Mike, because Mike is so polite he doesn't even interrupt us while we're rambling, even though he's on here to interrupt us.
I'm multimedia.
That's true. That's true. Keeping the chat going.
Getting that search engine optimization up.
Making sure that the little chat display is still working, right? It's an important factor. So yeah, let's talk about log shipping. Log shipping is one of those technologies that's almost on the opposite side of the spectrum. And in fact, in Brent's matrix, it is the opposite side of the spectrum. It is a very cheap, asynchronous way of sending over data. So, Mala, you wanna talk about this, or you want me to hit this topic?
I can say something to it. So log shipping is one of the oldest HA technologies that's been out there. It is really simple to understand. It's really simple to set up in most scenarios. All you're doing is you're incrementally applying the changes that happen on one database to another, and you're making it grow that way and come online when you actually need it. So log shipping does have issues. It does, it's really easy to crash it. It can have it used to have at least a lot of bugs. There's all kinds of issues with it. But the heart of the thing to me is that it's really simple and easy. It doesn't require very high level hardware skills or anything to set it up like some of the other technologies do. It's simple and easy. And it's been around for a long time. It's something that's definitely considered, as number one in the scenario we're discussing, like in small shops where there is not much of budget available to set up anything fancy. It's definitely considered a good option. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and adding a little bit onto it, think of log shipping as I'm continuously restoring backups to some other machine. So I have a full backup that I've taken at some point, and then I'm going to just keep on restoring transaction log backups over there. I take those transaction log backups, maybe every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I apply them on my remote server. So that way, I have a source where I'm taking those backups. I have a source where I'm applying them. I'm showing that I can restore them. And in the event of disaster, I can switch over to that remote instance, and I've lost 1 to 2 transaction log backups worth of data. So if you take it every 5 minutes, you lose about 5 to 10 minutes worth of data. If you take it every hour, you lose 1 to 2 hours worth of data. It's going to depend on how much data you have, how frequently you want to take those transaction log backups. But I can also say have them on different servers with different variances. So perhaps I have something that is restoring every 5 minutes, and that's my stuff hits the fan server. But maybe I have something that applies more like once an hour, which is my developer forgot a where clause server. It's going to cost you more. It's going to, in terms of licensing those extra SQL Server instances, or the extra hardware that's needed to run the restorations. But if you regularly have developers who forget where clauses, it may be worth having a second copy of it, or it's in a completely different location where I have a near backup. Again, that 5 minutes, which is in the same data center, maybe on a different server in a different rack. And then I have a far backup, which maybe I write that out once every 10, 15, 20 minutes, and it's somewhere across the US or across the globe. So at this point, I now have multiple possible instances to which I could recover depending on the severity of this problem. One of the big downsides to log replication is that very little of this is automated, especially the failing over part. You don't really fail over in the sense of push button, now you're pointing to this other machine. Instead, you'd have to update connection strings. You'd have to reroute in some respect. There are ways to make that easier. You could use, for example, DNS CNAMEs to act as a front for your SQL Server instance of choice. You may have other possible answers, but what you're going to end up doing is having some process to update and let everybody know that, this is the server you need to point to now. So you're not going to get 2-second failover. If you want failover within a few seconds, that's where you get some intermediate technologies. Prior to SQL Server 2012, database mirroring was the answer. As of SQL Server 2012, database mirroring has been deprecated, and as of the year 2022, database mirroring is still in SQL Server. Go figure. There are also availability groups. Availability groups are the big boy pants database administrator technology for this sort of thing. There is definitely a you must be this tall to ride the ride with availability groups, and you will have a DBA most of whose job is making sure these things are still going as you expect them to. They can be finicky. They can be troublesome. They will take a lot of time, care, and feeding. But the benefit to them, there are a couple of benefits. One of them is that if you have the availability group, especially if it's a synchronous availability group, well, that's where, if you look at Brent's chart, you could say RTO of about 1 minute and RPO of near 0. So the closer you get to 0, the more expensive that gets. But if you're saying, let's RPO of a minute, RTO of a minute, that's actually pretty achievable with an availability group, a synchronous availability group in the same data center. And then as long as the data center doesn't explode, you're good. If the data center does explode, you might have another instance somewhere else that you've set up a distributed availability group to write out to. Distributed availability groups, again, you really need to have a DBA who knows what they're doing. This is where if Tracy were on here, I would absolutely be dumping this question off on Tracy to talk more about it, because she knows a whole bunch about distributed availability groups. And essentially, you will need DBA chops. You will need a lot of time and effort to keep them going. But the benefit in them is that you can meet RPO and RTO requirements quite effectively. If you're sitting in between and you say, I do need this, but either I'm not running Enterprise Edition, or I don't quite need 1 minute, maybe if it's a few minutes. This is where basic availability groups, and you didn't hear it from me, but database mirroring are still viable technologies. Database mirroring and basic availability groups both have the concept of a listener. So unlike log shipping, where I would have to go update connection strings, or if I'm using a CNAME, update DNS and have it point to the new CNAME, have the CNAME point to the new SQL Server instance. With a listener, I can just have the client connect to that listener to figure out what is the appropriate route to get to my current primary node. And then my secondary is available in the event of some emergency. I could run those in synchronous mode, which usually is okay if you're on the same rack, if you're in the same data center. Once you start talking about I'm not in the same rack, then you start looking at asynchronous, basic availability groups or availability groups or database mirroring. And you have some risk of loss of data. It's asynchronous. If some massive spike of updates happen and then the server falls over, then gonna have a problem where you lose some data. That's the A in asynchronous. But it is cheaper, it is faster, it will have less impact on your end user's day-to-day work at the cost of more impact if things go sideways. So what happens if the listener fails? If the listener fails, then you have problems. That's essentially what it boils down to. Usually, if the listener fails, then you're not going to have very much success in connecting to either the primary or the secondary because the application won't know which of the two, like where those things actually are. What you can do is have multiple listeners, if I remember correctly. So Mala. Oh, you're on mute. And Solomon probably also knows, but has been keeping quiet.
Yeah, I've heard some talks on it. I haven't worked on availability groups to that degree because I stepped away from DBA works around the time they were becoming popular. But I've heard a bunch of talks from Tracy and from others, and I'm pretty sure that they use it where we work, where Kevin and I work pretty extensively. So, yeah.
So the answer is yes. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So you can have multiple listeners for the same availability group. And here is a blog post from the SQL Server team talking about it.
But like Kevin said sometime before, none of these things are cheap.
Right.
Yes.
The more pieces you throw into this, the more you've got to debug, the more you have to troubleshoot, the more things can go south, the more you need good, experienced people working on these problems.
Right.
Because there will be problems.
Yes.
Testing that stuff sounds like a bear.
It can be. And I mean, sometimes it'd be fun. Let me start pulling wires in a data center. But you would need a realistic development environment where you could turn off a server, where you could simulate some sort of issue. And if you get smart about it, that could be things like disabling network cards. So you disable a network card on a machine. Obviously, you don't want to be remotely connected to that machine if you do such a thing. But you can test this out. You should test this out. And
so I don't know if this is a practice everywhere. It has been at places where I have worked at least, and I was, to be honest, I'm still a little shocked that they don't have it where we work at. But you need to devote at least one day a year where you actually try out whatever you have in place for HADR. Like fake a disaster and try it out. Make sure that it works. You have to.
I'm remembering when I was on the bus, and then there's the day where you had to jump out of the back of the bus.
Yep.
Like school bus, like one day a year you had to actually do that.
Yep. I grew up in the Midwest. We had tornado drills. You go into the center of the building, the school, and you duck your head between your legs. They put you in a hallway that was brick and had no windows. So trying to prevent glass and debris from hitting you. But yeah, you practice tornado drills.
Are you mirror Kevin or regular Kevin?
I'm I have killed all multiverse versions of me because there can be only one, and absorbed their power via the quickening. So it would be nice to guard against a cluster quorum failure. Yeah, in the SQL Server world, I don't want to be too blithe about this, but usually the answer is more devices, more things. And so if you have multiple listeners, you could have multiple shares. If you're talking Windows Server failover cluster, you can have multiple tokens that are acting as the voters in quorum. And your quorum doesn't have to be 3. It could be 5, 7, 9, 15. But the more things you have, the more scenarios where something can go bad. And so there is that trade-off. And so as your scenario gets more complex, you're going to need more resources, more time, more people to make sure that everything is working appropriately. Because sometimes it's like a house of cards where you're putting so many different things together, and at some point one collapse is catastrophic. So you thought that having 15 different things as 15 file witness shares as your voters in quorum was sufficient, but then it turns out that they're all on the same SAN, or that they're all in the same internet backbone provider, that they're all they have some underlying fragility that as a result of a catastrophic event causes what you thought was a very secure system to collapse utterly. And completely 80% tangentially, I am kind of obliquely referring to Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragility book, and the idea of the concept that you can put in a bunch of tests and structures, but if you don't understand how they can interrelate, then what you may be doing is you're building a bunch of pieces that all will fail at the same time in a way that you didn't anticipate. So that's kind of the downside risk of all of this. You're only as good as your last restore attempt. This is true. And having some sort of process, having a process is critical. Testing the process is critical. And even going so far as automating tests. Log shipping is a good way of being able to perform some of this automation, because at the very least, that you can apply those backups. But then every once in a while, you might want to take that server online, bring it up, make it available, and make sure that you could select data against it. Make sure that everything is still accessible, and then restart log shipping, take it back out into restoring state, restart log shipping, and get things going again.
So there is also this scenario where you plan that disaster recovery day where I have worked. Also, it helps to check the technology out that way. It certainly helps and is better than having nothing. Disasters don't always happen in that kind of a planned sequence. Like exactly, server A goes down and then server B and then server C. So it's not the best way to test it. That's when you get into things like chaos engineering and things like that, where you create scenarios that are more true to life that happen, and you see how you deal with it. Better than having nothing, but don't make it too structured too, where it's unlikely to resemble a real disaster when it happens.
Right. But also, I'll unless you have guidance from above, if you have air cover, then chaos engineering is incredibly useful.
Right.
Where we're just going to start using the chaos monkey. We're just going to start rebooting machines. I mean, this is a tool that Netflix built. It's called Chaos Monkey. And the idea was that it would turn off EC2 instances randomly. It would delete network connections randomly. It would do things like this, where it's essentially the equivalent of pulling plugs, pulling cords, like a monkey running around your data center and just yanking out plugs. And they found early on that their system was very unstable to these sorts of random changes. And they had to get more robust about it because AWS has a minor blip, and then suddenly nobody can watch Netflix, and now everyone's angry. So you have this notion of, well, what happens if machines go down? Can we recover? And they've built out a whole suite of tools. Now, as we saw not too long ago, it's not perfect. There have been Netflix outages that have been due in part to AWS outages. So, they're certainly not perfect, but what they do have is tooling in place that basically says if the East Coast is getting a bunch of errors, then they'll start shifting traffic to their West Coast servers automatically. And they'll kind of switch them around. They'll load balance them as long as you don't have too many errors on a particular region. And you can do that when you have the tooling and when you have the capability to test things out. So there's a lot. That's kind of very large company with very large amounts of money being lost when they're not running types of firms. This is not the mom and pop organization where they've got 3 servers.
Yeah.
Because if you shut down one of those 3 servers, you're probably losing a lot of stuff right there. So chaos engineering is not the type of thing that you just walk in Monday morning and say, haha, I'm chaos engineering, and you just yank the server cord. That's a way to get chaos engineering on your resume, and you'll need that because you'll be looking for a new job.
So when I cut that internet cord underneath the ocean between Europe and the United States, I can just say that TriPass told me that.
As a concept that people are at least beginning to think of it, because these HADR drills used to be so silly, almost bordering on so structured that you would never get anything out of it other than the fact that your backup is working or your failover is working.
Yep. And actually, we had Sean McCown present for the user group not too long ago. I remember Sean would talk about how he'd just go up to the DBAs on his team and say, hey, server 22 is down. I need you to write a backup restore statement right now. And he'd just stand over their shoulder, write that restore statement for me. And he wanted to see, can you do it? How quickly can you do it? Can you do it from memory? What do you have to look up? Because his thought was, well, when the real server 22 really goes down, you're going to have 3 layers of management standing over your shoulder, because clearly having multiple layers of management up to C levels standing over your shoulder makes you a more effective and efficient employee.
Well, you should have, in my opinion, a good DBA team should have a set of restore scripts handy, not expect any DBA to write it.
Yeah. So what he would do is for new DBAs, basically like keep drilling them on backup restore until they could memorize the commands. Once you have it down cold, then you use the scripts. Otherwise, I want you to write every statement out, because I want you to know that at heart, because when those 3 levels of management all stand over your desk, you're going to fumble. And if you've practiced, all you have to do, you don't even have to think. You can type restore database and you remember all of the components to it because you've done it dozens or hundreds of times. So it's muscle memory. And so
Yes.
even if your mind has gone blank, at least your fingers are moving.
Fair enough.
And then you can use all of the nice scripts. You can have those for the sake of making life easier for you, but you drill and you drill and you drill until this stuff is down cold. And not everything has to be down cold. Things like querying certain non-core DMVs, troubleshooting specific scenarios that don't happen very often. That's the kind of stuff where, yeah, go to the script, have the run book, have that available, just know where it is. But for something that's innately so intertwined with the nature of the DBA, that's something that you just want to have down.
That's true, Kevin. I agree.
So, doing it in a drill, very different than when your phone is ringing off the hook. It's hard to think. Yeah, your mind just goes blank. My example is the three layers of management breathing down your neck, because when there's a crisis, they don't have anything to do, so they just have to stand over your shoulders to make it look like they're doing something important. And their bosses, similarly, don't have anything to do until you get up to the level where that person actually does have something to do, and they want to look out and see, oh, you're standing over someone's desk. You're proactive instead of sitting at your keyboard. Or if it's remote, you're like typing, I need a status report every 30 seconds. I need a status report. Like, it's still the same as the last time you asked. I haven't even had a chance to type anything over here because I'm too busy answering status reports over here for everybody. I mean, that's a slightly different rant on a slightly different topic. And I mean, even in my job as manager, I have had the case where I have stood over somebody's desk because I had nothing better to do and they were troubleshooting, and eventually you just realize this is dumb. I'm not helping. Like, if you need me, contact me. Otherwise, I'm gonna just give you some air cover.
I'm one of those people who I cannot function if somebody's looking at me like that behind my desk and asking me, do this and show me this, blah, blah, blah. That's not how I work. It's like, ask me for something, I'll send it to you. Don't just stand there and make me do it like that. It's just, to me, it doesn't work that way. It's very controlling. I can't function like that.
I've had to practice it. We do pair coding periodically, and then I demonstrate a lot of stuff now for my new clients because they're like data scientists that use R and they don't really use SQL. So
right,
I've gotten better at it, but you're right. It takes practice to and I just make mistakes. I'm like, oh, I write SQL every day, but I'm doing this wrong. So we'll just skip over that for now.
Yeah,
I've been in those places when the server is down and 3 levels of management or 4 levels of management come by asking you what. It depends on the organization, of course, but I have told more than one person, please go and take a seat. I'll let you know when it comes back up. Your standing here is not going to make it come up faster.
It's stressful. I've been
right.
I had to make slides for the board at like 5 in the morning.
Trying to help you. That doesn't,
Not for the database, but for something else.
Yep. And that's where pro management tip, if you are a manager and you're in that kind of scenario, 2 things that you do, especially if you're that bottom rung of manager. Number 1, air cover. You find all of those other managers who are above and they're hovering around, and you just like lead them away somewhere else. And we're working on it. What's the current status? We're working hard on it. I'll give you an update as soon as it's available, and let the person work on it. And number 2, if they do need you, hey, this other team, the person's not responding. That's where I can actually help, where I can actually do something useful. Unless it's directly in my specialty. If it was a database related thing, then I'd be diving in. But if it's not related to anything I do, if it's just my employees got to do it, those are the 2 things that you do as a manager. And so Rednello asks, out of curiosity, why was database mirroring deprecated? Mal is exactly right. Availability groups took over the notion of database mirroring. Basic availability groups have effectively replaced database mirroring as a concept. So in practice, they are very similar. Technically, they are different. And Microsoft supports basic availability groups and regular availability groups, but not database mirroring. It's still out there. You can still use it. You can use it in 2019. When 2022 comes around, I would put money that you'd still be able to use it. But you're not supposed to, according to Microsoft. This is a reason why small SME fire teams break off during outage calls is a good idea. Yeah, there's no reason to be on the bridge line 100% of the time. You essentially have, or you have the team that is working on a specific part of the problem, they break off. You know what? If you need something, come back on here. We'll be around talking about the weather, talking about sports, while you guys are doing the real work. But, now you're here. Okay, critical situation. Oh, we need to get this person involved. Or we need this resource, this asset. We need it now. 200 eggs and 24 gallons of milk. Don't ask questions. No questions asked. You're making French toast. I understand. Let's get it.
This is a topic for another day. I know it's late, but we have like a relay system. Like one of the things we've talked about for disaster recovery. I know this is not related, so we can talk about it another day. But like, how do you communicate with each other when stuff's off?
That is a good topic. So that's gonna go probably for the next episode of Shop Talk.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for how to communicate with people when things go sideways. Next time on Shop Talk.
To say about that.
It's happened here, so yeah, I got some next time.
With that, thank you, everybody. Glad you made it out here tonight. And we are going to wrap up. Remember, tomorrow we have a SQL Server user group main meeting. Let me pull it up so that I get it completely right. We have managing HADR with DBA tools. Isn't that so timely? Frank Gill is going to talk about using the DBA tools PowerShell library to help with high availability and disaster recovery. If you're interested in tonight's topic, you probably want to tune in tomorrow. So with that, we're going to wrap things up. Everybody, have a wonderful day.
Bye.